Welcome everybody to another episode of Talking Landscape Photography, and we have a very special guest with us today from all the way from Colorado in the United States. We have Matt Payne. Matt is a photographer, a mountaineer, adventurer, does a lot of his photography locally in the Colorado area, but it's travelled widely. Matt's also quite an influential member of the landscape community. He runs an absolutely fabulous podcast called F-Stop, Collaborate and Listen. And if you haven't listened to any episodes from that podcast, I highly recommend getting on there and enjoying the more than 200 shows. I think you're up to nearly 230 now, Matt, with your podcast, and that's a phenomenal effort. We know how much work it goes into producing a show, and for you to get to 230 with the amount of organising and collaborating and getting people on board, it's a brilliant effort. And many guests on there are very well-known names in the landscape photography world, and there's quite a few people on there that aren't as well known but equally is brilliant in their thoughts. And Matt's also an advocate for responsible photography, landscape photography in regards to looking after the environment and that sort of thing, which is very admirable. And also he is the co-founder of a new photography award that has closed for this year, but called the Natural Landscape Photography Awards, which no doubt Matt will be able to talk to us about later in the show as well. So after a long introduction, welcome, Matt, and how's things over there in the United States?
Good. I'm just exhausted hearing that whole list of things that I've been up to. It's hard to believe that I'm able to pull all that off while maintaining a full-time job and getting out and making my own images. So thanks for that reality check there, Nick. I really appreciate that.
Wow, you mustn't sleep at all, Matt, if you've got the full-time job on top of all that. That's very, very impressive.
You know, my secret is, well, I have many secrets, Luke, but one of them is that I'm pretty good at my job. So, unless there's an emergency, I'm able to, use my, I don't know, I use my time well. I'm very good at time management, but I also, like this week, because I'm also in the process of writing a book, I think I've worked probably 100 hours this week.
Wow.
Total.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel like work,
squeezing
right?
us in, Matt. That's a real honor to be able to make it in with you being so busy like
what
that.
do they say? If you want to get something done, give it to someone who's a busy person.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah. And you have a family as well, Matt?
I do. I have a almost 14-year-old son and my wife who's currently out of town. So I'm trying to single parent right now as well. So
Oh, right. Wow.
he's a pretty awesome kid though. In fact, he helped me cook dinner. Like, he's pretty awesome. So
What kind of line of work you in, Matt?
I work for a nonprofit that provides services to adults with developmental and intellectual disabilities.
Oh, wow.
So we basically, the spectrum of the types of individuals that we help ranges all the way from people that might have a mild disability that live on their own and they might just need help grocery shopping or going to a doctor's appointment, all the way to people who have no functional communication and are bound to a wheelchair and depend on somebody 24/7 for their care. So we basically are the only service provider in this part of the state for all of those services, and I'm the program director, so I oversee basically everything.
Wow. Jeez. That's a very impressive job, Matt. Great service to the community.
Yeah.
Where did you sort of start the F-Stop? I mean, that's obviously got a long history, and what was your sort of intention and motivation behind that? Was it about you? Was it about the community? Was it about a purpose? Has it changed and evolved, over time? Because it's very much how people probably after the show are going to start connecting with you and what you stand for.
Yeah. So I started the podcast in April of 2017. And, I was actually at my son's basketball game. I don't know if you've ever been to a 8-year-old, 9-year-old basketball game. It's pretty much just chaos. There's not a lot to watch. And I just got this idea while I was watching this game that I wanted to start this podcast. And it was based off of another podcast that I used to listen to that was basically this guy interviewed celebrities, and they would but it was laid back, and they would talk about life in general. They wouldn't really talk about acting and music much. They would just talk about their lives. And so the format was kind of born out of that. It used to be called Nerdist. The guy's name is Chris Hardwick, if you're familiar with that.
Yep.
He's the host of Talking Dead, I believe, the after show for The Walking Dead. But basically, and it's called ID10T now, or Idiot. But I based it off of that. And what I did is I just sat down on my phone and I wrote down all the names of all these people that I wanted to talk to. Some of them were my friends. Some of them were people that, I admired their photography for many years. And it just started there. And I don't know if you listened to the first 15, 20, 25, 30 episodes. Yep. It was pretty raw. There's a lot of cuss words and profanity and not a lot of structure. And as over the years, it's through a lot of feedback from listeners and also just my own personal preferences. It's morphed into a lot more structure with a lot more, I come up with a lot of questions beforehand. I do a lot more research beforehand. So it's definitely changed a lot in the last, almost 5 years now. Oof.
Yeah, look, I don't know how I got onto it, but I got onto your podcast really early. So you were probably only 2 or 3 or 4 episodes into it, and I'm not sure.
Sorry,
No, and I was hooked straight away because you were talking about the things that I wanted to listen to, and that's still true today. I mean, I haven't listened to all 230, but I've definitely listened to a good maybe half to 2/3, and it's such a great listen for anyone involved in landscape photography. But and just the range of guests that you've had on, and the different subgenres of landscape photography, and the surrounding issues and all that sort of thing is just really great. And in 230 episodes in, I guess it's it's quite normal for it to evolve, and we were pretty rough and ready when we started this show, and I don't think we've evolved that much, fellas. But
I don't know if it plays that much, right?
No, probably not. But you can certainly tell. It happens with most podcasts, I suppose. You start off with certain production values and maybe a bit less structure, and then it evolves over time, and you can certainly hear that in your show. So well done for sticking with it, because it's a fabulous asset to the landscape community, and it's got such a great educational sort of tone to it, through whether it's talking about environmental stuff, to how to run your own gallery, how to print things, how to sell things, NFTs. I know you've just done an episode on those, which I haven't listened to yet, but I'm actually looking forward to listening to it. I think you had Alex Nail on that episode. Is that right, Matt?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, as well as others. But I really enjoy listening to Alex, and I know you've had him on several times on the show, but he's one of my favourite people to listen to in these podcasts, because a lot of his ideas align with my own. So I guess you sort of flock to those ideas. But also there was a fascinating episode, panel discussion that Alex was involved with, where you're talking about basically art and how it relates to landscape photography and digital manipulation and not digital manipulation. And that episode to me was a real standout. Fabulous.
It's a classic.
Yeah, a classic.
I think it's still the #1 downloaded episode.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a fascinating range of views, and just brilliant listening. So well done. And while we're onto it, you did you want to talk about the Natural Landscape Photography Awards and how that came about?
Oh man, well, you already brought up Alex.
Yep.
You know, it's funny, when I had Alex and Aaron Bobnick on that episode back in, that must have been 2018, I guess. I was still pretty on the fence myself in terms of my personal stance on photo manipulation and digital editing and the intersection with landscape photography and art and all of that. And I suppose it was only inevitable that, you know, because of my past being so rooted in more of a documentary style of photography based on wanting to capture moments from my mountain climbing adventures, that I would creep more and more into the camp of trying to keep photographs more, I guess, literal or true to experience, or, you know, more to the eyewitness style than what we see being most popularized today. And so, you know, it was actually that particular episode kind of sealed the deal for me personally. I still back then was dabbling in composites, especially with night photography, and mostly, you know, hindsight being 2020, I was doing that stuff just because I wanted to be noticed. I wanted to be that popular photographer. I wanted people to see my work. I wanted to, you know, I wanted to be on that stage with all of those people that I saw getting the, you know, the front page of 500px back then, and you know, all of that kind of stuff. So of course, hindsight's 2020, and I know I wasn't really that aware of that at the time. But through that episode, and then through lots and lots of other conversations I had with many other photographers, I just came to the realization that that kind of set me on the path that I'm on now, which is trying to have my images more reflect what you can actually experience. Now, there's a lot you can do to your photographs that still makes them adhere to what you experienced, or maybe has an artistic interpretation. You can put your own spin on things without completely deviating from what reality has to offer. And so, and I have nothing against, if that's your thing, like you want to drop in a Milky Way into a scene where the Milky Way wasn't there, or if you want to drop in a sky from a different scene, or, you know, whatever. If that's your thing, that's cool. I just personally have found in my own experience that those are the types of images that kind of get elevated to what people see, because it's so poppy and in your face and magnificent and fantastical. Yeah, but it kind of, for lack of a better term, it lacks soul beyond that, because it is manufactured from nothingness. That's my personal opinion, and I've just alienated 35 to 45% of your listeners. So
I think they probably have a pretty good idea where we sit on the fence there, Matt. So I think they've probably really been alienated to some degree.
Yeah, look, it's something that we'll talk about throughout this episode, actually, because you're going to talk a bit more about your own journey and that sort of thing. But going back to the awards, you set it up with like-minded people for the purpose of being able to present or have a, for want of a better term, sort of an even playing field for a competition where those sort of natural way of presenting photographs was able to be expressed in the competition.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's once you put your artwork out there for public consumption, it kind of goes back to that Oliver Wendell Holmes idea of the court of public opinion, and what was it that Oliver Wendell Holmes said? It was the oh man, you're gonna make me look it up. Basically, what he was saying is, you put something. Oh, the you're gonna edit this out, I assume, but no, you just make me look like an idiot. It's fine.
I don't think we will edit it out.
No, it was basically what his idea was that if you have a bunch of ideas out there in the economy of ideas, the best idea is going to win. So it's the same with our photography. If you're only basing it off of aesthetics and aesthetics only, the images that are perfected in Photoshop and created from out of nothing into something grand are almost always going to win out over something that doesn't use those techniques. With some rare exceptions. I think we saw Adam Gibbs win International Landscape Photographer of the Year in, what was that, like 2017, I think, or 18. But those are pretty rare exceptions to the norm. And what I've found was that kind of the straw that broke the camel's back was the results from two of the biggest landscape photography competitions last year, Epson and International Landscape Photographer of the Year. Most of the images that won were heavily manipulated. A lot of the images that made the finalists were just copies of other people's compositions from popular locations. So there was nothing that really differentiated them to make. I mean, it's basically a bunch. Imagine if we were in a competition like in music, like the Grammys, it would be like a bunch of cover bands winning the Grammys over original artists. Is basically what happened. But make it worse, there's cover bands that were basically all of the music was synthesized from a computer algorithm. And so there was, to me, that was just kind of like, is this really the direction we want landscape photography to go? And I know that I wasn't alone. I had lots and lots of people reach out. I saw lots of outcry on social media about the results of people saying like, I'm never going to be able to win against this kind of stuff, right? And so we wanted to create a competition where that type of work had a place where it could actually compete against similar work that adhered to the same types of rules. So that was
a level
kind
playing field, isn't it? Yeah.
Right. And again, you could make the argument that those other competitions have a level playing field as well, in that anything goes, which is totally true. And if you're not somebody who ethically believes that that's the direction you want to take your work, it kind of makes it to where you can't compete, right?
Exactly. It is a level playing field in, say, the Epson Panel Awards, where anything goes. But if you're like me and you guys are, you don't want to do that. You're not going to do that with your photos. I mean, I've got the skill in Photoshop where I can do that stuff. Not maybe to the same level of some of these guys that are doing it, but I can do it, and I can learn how to do it if I don't know how to do it. It's not a drama, but I don't want to do it. And as a result, I'm never going to enter the Epson Panel Awards because, I know there's no chance of me getting in there unless I had something absolutely amazingly exceptional that was just right there and perfect, for want of a better term. But I don't want to go there. I don't want to be in that, change my own values to enter a competition. And
right.
Yeah, and so which is why this award that you guys have created is such a breath of fresh air, because it does have restrictions. It's not totally restricted either. It's not like you're taking a photo straight out of the camera and that's all you can do. I mean, don't anyone get this competition wrong. There's all the usual moderate adjustments that you can make. You just can't composite stuff, except for focus stacks and exposure blending, but you can't put something that wasn't there. You can't take something away other than a dust spot or two.
It's very similar to the nature photography rules. In, like I say, we have an Australian Geographic Nature Photographer of the Year competition down here, and quite analogous, I think, in terms of some of those rules.
It's almost exactly the same, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, you can also see it as a challenge. Like I've entered the International Landscape Awards, I think 7 years in a row, and I've made the top 100 every time with all completely straight images. And I entered the Panel Awards once and I got 3 golds and 2 silvers, and it was sort of like, it almost meant more to me because I was competing against a skill level that I don't have. I'm not like you, Nick. I don't use Photoshop from bar of soap, and I don't know how to do that stuff. And
Well, Nick's not lucky because he doesn't do aerials.
10 years later, I don't even know how. But but I will also admit that I look at the level of the awards and I'm like, it's almost like a Photoshop awards basically, rather than a photographic awards. And I've got an old joke when I first saw the Australian awards, the APAs they're called. And I went in about 12 years ago, came to Hobart, and I went through the whole thing, and I just like, APAs, the Australian Professional Photoshop Awards. And I actually thought that's what it was because there was not a single straight image on the wall. And I knew enough about photography to realize that was the case. And I literally have joked about that. And I've been judging it now for 10 years, and I've had to come to terms with recognizing the artistry and the vision and the creative potential that these people are using with the tools they have available, and honoring that as well, and doing that specific to the category and the particular, because there are categories in the APAs that are more purist and don't allow that level of manipulation or composite as well. So there's a bit of a mixture, and just as a judge, I've had to learn to appreciate both. And I think it's up to you as an entrant to decide what you want to support, what you want to be challenged by, and what you want to engage in. And there's enough competitions in the world that there's quite an array of opportunity to express yourself and move into different realms out there. And you know, when I saw this awards, the first thing I did is, you know what, I don't enter a heap of competitions, but I'm going to support this one. So I went straight in there, Matt, and I've got a stack of entries in there, and I'm really excited about where they sit. And the fact that you guys are going to have, you know, no idea whose work it is, because there's no names, there's no nothing, and there's no descriptions, there's no anything, no titles, and there's not even the file names of the actual files you're entering. So it's really a pure playing field, and I'm quite curious to see how, you know, the caliber of judges and the collective community that you have around that is world class, and I'm excited to see how that presents and what the ripple effect that sends out into the world, and how it kind of maybe augments and brings together that aspect of landscape photography that's more traditional and you know, grounded and real, I guess.
Yes, it's funny you mentioned the file names. They're all randomized because Tim wrote a bunch of codes. So like one of our file names are like A1 NFZGL1 underscore 1360 underscore 9975. So yeah, we have no idea whose photos they are.
That's really clever, actually. That's good to hear. I'm also on a mission to have aerial photography banned from these competitions. Paul. So
I don't think you want it banned. You just want it its own category.
No, I don't want it banned. I don't want it banned. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. It's just about that level playing field, and you're not on a level playing field. 3,000
in
feet
these
in the air.
awards, if you had an aerial landscape shot, it had to be admitted into the aerial category. Is that right? And there was no separate.
Yeah, we have an aerial category.
Yeah, and if it's an aerial image, it has to go in the aerial category.
Oh, so there is an aerial category.
It's already separated from the
rest perfect.
Of the
that's fantastic.
You're welcome, Nick.
Competition's made for
you, okay? Yep. No, you guys.
I got mixed feelings about that, because a lot of the work that I strive to create, it could be under a microscope, it could be from outer space, it could be something else, and that is actually taken away instantly by being forced to declare what it is, which you don't have to do in other categories. So I got mixed feelings about that one, but I appreciate and respect it, and I've chosen to support it regardless.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I did look it up. It's Oliver Wendell Holmes was the marketplace of ideas. So there you go. I don't know why my brain couldn't get
it's a really great way of looking at it and understanding, I guess, the predicament that some photographers find themselves in, and it's great that you guys could work on a potential solution, I guess, to some of that angst that people might have around that. So that's really fantastic.
Right. I mean, it was, I was just getting tired of complaining about it. So I was like, you know what? Instead of complaining, I should probably just, you know, put my money where my mouth is.
It's great modeling from all you guys, you know, like it's just the armchair critics are sitting there complaining about it. Like, why not do something? And that's again why I was like, you know, I'm totally behind these guys. Awesome.
Thank
No,
you.
brilliant work.
It's a
Well, we
lot.
better start sharing some images and having a look at what you got, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, should I share my screen?
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thanks.
All right, cool. Let's we'll
Do you,
do it.
where in Colorado are you, Matt?
All right, so at this point, hopefully you can see a map.
Yeah, we can.
Oh,
Yep.
yep.
So this is the state of Colorado, which is where I spend 90% of my time, I would say. And this is Gaia GPS. And so you can see all of these little colored sections are the different routes and tracks that I've laid down on different hikes I've done. Not, since I've used Gaia, which is since 2017. So, but you can see I've been pretty busy down here. So I live down here in the southwest corner in a town called Durango, which is basically Utah is right over there on the left, and New Mexico is down here, and Arizona is down there. So I'm pretty close to a lot of really cool stuff.
Yeah, sure.
But the best part about living in Durango is that about 30 minutes drive north, I have access to, in my opinion, the best mountains in North America.
Wow.
Or at least in the lower United States. So these are called the Needle Mountains, part of the San Juan mountain range. I've done a ton of climbing and backpacking up in here. As you guys probably have heard me say a few times on my podcast, I got my start in photography through my mountain climbing adventures. So I started climbing mountains when I was 4 years old with my dad. And I in Colorado, there's 53 mountains that are over the elevation of 14,000 feet. And in 2012, I finished climbing all of those. And then actually in Colorado, there's over 500 mountains that are over 13,000 feet. And I've climbed the highest 100 mountains in Colorado, did that in 2018.
Just for the metric viewers, 14,000 feet is 4,267 meters.
Jeez.
So that is
there.
high. That is big. They're
That's
big
taller than
Like-
Mount Cook, isn't it?
That's higher than Mount Cook, isn't it?
Yeah, wow.
Yep.
Yeah, I
tallest-
think Mount Cook's 3.8, I think.
Yeah, wow.
That's obviously
That's serious.
The highest mountain in Tasmania is 1,617 meters. So put that in perspective.
Yeah, definitely.
yeah.
And in
So-
Australia, is it 2.1, 2.2, Lucky?
Yeah, I think Cossie's about that 2.2 or something. But
Double the highest mountain in Australia. There you go.
And is most of that off track, Matt, or there's sort of tracks with a lot of those?
You mean like trails?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so there's definitely some trails like this is a trail that comes up into here. But then most of the time once you're up, in the tree line area, there's usually not much trail, especially on the 14ers, there's pretty much trail for most of them, but because a lot of people do it, but so anyway,
what's the attraction to the mountains? Like, obviously, it's a big part of what your soul's been drawn to from a very young age. How would you describe that to people that don't have access to this and don't really understand that realm?
Yeah, wow. How would I describe it? So here in Colorado, typically what that looks like is you're starting off at around 8 or 9 or 10,000 feet in the forest. And then you're hiking up in through the trees. And then it's usually pretty steep to get up there. I think it's probably best to just illustrate through maybe some images. So,
because you're already quite high in Colorado, aren't you?
Yeah. So like I live at 6,700 feet where I live.
We live at like 200.
Yeah.
Feet, not meters.
Yeah.
Right. So this is one of my favorite images just because of lots of variables. One being seeing a sunrise like this from the top of a high 13,000 foot mountain is a pretty rare and special event, but it's also where I took the image. It's in the heart of the San Juan Mountains here in Colorado. In fact, if we go back to the map, I took that photo from the top of this mountain right here, Turret Peak, which requires like a 10-mile backpacking after a long train ride up into this basin. And then from the basin, you're going from about 11,000 feet up to the saddle, which is 13, and then up to the summit, which is 13.8. And then I'm looking east out across all of these mountains here. So, and I've climbed most of those. But so what I love about this is that it kind of encapsulates, why I got into photography to begin with. It was to document these climbs that I've done, but then to also showcase some of the most beautiful events in locations that most people will probably never get to see, just because of the amount of effort that it takes to get there.
And skill and risk.
Yeah, I mean, this one, if you're in really good physical shape, it's a hike. So there's no technical climbing for this particular mountain. Although
looks a bit techie to me.
Yeah, to get to this point, it's not too bad. But this mountain in the back here where the sun's rising behind, that's called Jagged Mountain. And I've done that one. And it does require rope. There's like three pitches of rope climbing for that peak. This thing over here, that requires rope to get, it's called the Index. Like almost nobody climbs it because it's almost impossible. So
Matt, do you obviously have pretty lightweight gear that you take around as well?
So yeah, for this trip I was still using my Nikon D800 with the 14 to 24 to 70, 70
beast mode. Wow.
But I think literally after this trip I switched to the Sony mirrorless system.
Very good.
So yeah, I'm right now I'm shooting the A7R4, and I've got a variety of lenses based on kind of what I'm up to, I guess you could say. Yeah. So so what I've kind of put a lot of thought into these types of scenes for me, and evaluated it against kind of what we talked about earlier in terms of these moments and these scenes that we see kind of being manufactured in Photoshop. And I've kind of come to the conclusion as to one of the reasons why that type of stuff has bothered me for so long, and it's because it doesn't require the amount of effort that I had to go through, nor does it require the chance. This type of scene is very rare. I could have taken this sky and dropped it in from another photo shoot, no problem, but it just wouldn't have made the photograph special for me. And so I think those are the two partnering things for me that have really kind of, I guess you could say, cemented my beliefs on why I believe the things I do in terms of photography and manipulation. Now, of course, putting in a ton of effort doesn't make it a good photograph, right?
Although
there's a point to that, isn't there? I mean, Nick probably knows too. You get a lot of emotional attachment that can happen with images that have taken such a huge amount of effort to put into, and sometimes it's hard to separate yourself from that objectively when it comes to curating your work or putting something together a competition, and that's another kind of journey again, I think, to separate.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, there's definitely images that I have that are my favorites that most other people probably don't think they're that great, but it's because of that experience and the moment and the memories that it pulls up for me. I think that's why it's still a favorite photo for me.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong, Matt and Paul. You make such an effort to get a photograph, and there's sometimes, unless the person knows the location and how difficult it is to get there, or the conditions are terrible or whatever to get a particular photograph, it is really hard to sort of convey that in the photo, and I think a rule not a rule, but a thought with competitions and stuff like that is that you have to remove that emotional attachment to the journey unless it's conveyed somehow in the photograph, because you might be putting a greater emphasis on the value of the photograph that a viewer just isn't going to get unless you sit them down and explain the full story.
That's
Right.
one thing I appreciated when we had Martin Hawes on, Nick, and looking at some of the images he captured, and some of them were, weeks in the making.
That's 16 days to get there, and like 10 days of off track scrub. It's like, oh my god.
Yeah. So one of my other favorite areas here in the Needles is this mountain range called the Grenadiers. I actually have a tattoo of that mountain called Vestal Peak on my arm, and it's an amazing climb. It's a roped climb that you do from this ridge, and it's just bonkers. But I have one of my favorite images is of the Milky Way over that mountain. So that's Vestal there, and that's Arrow.
That is so crisp, Matt.
Must have been pretty chilly that night.
It was not terrible. I think it was like 1:30 in the morning.
In our summer, that's right. So it's not quite so bad. Whenever I see a clear sky and a Milky Way shot, it's normally winter down here, so it's freezing.
Oh, right.
Yep.
Yeah, this was in July. Yeah, July 2nd, I think it was, maybe. And what's cool about it is that I actually took it from way up here on this little hill right there. That's where I was standing.
Was that an orchestrated plan, knowing that
it wasn't? Yeah, it wasn't at all. It was. I knew I wanted to get up to that particular area to get this view, and then when I got up there, I got out photo pills, and I turned on the augmented reality, and I was like, oh my gosh, the Milky Way is going to be right above Vestal at 1:15 in the morning. So I was like, I guess I know what I'm doing tonight.
Yeah. Sorry, you go.
I was just saying, you have to be opportunistic with those things too, because you might try it another time and then you get the cloud, or there might be some more haze around, or something, or you have the moon around. So even though it's an unappealing time of the morning, you've just got to do it, because you never know if it's going to happen again or not when you're out there.
Oh yeah, and it was like maybe a 8-mile backpack, and then I had to climb up to that. It's like about 13,000 feet to get to this vantage point in the dark, so always fun.
So is this this sort of hiking off limits in Colorado in the winter, unless you're like full mountain?
No, it's not off limits, but it's tons of snow, very cold. There's significant avalanche danger.
Yep.
That would probably be the biggest risk, is avalanche, especially in this area, because basically on a lot of these slopes, I think what is it like, anything between like 23 and 40, 47 degrees. Basically, that's the risk zone for an avalanche, and there's a lot of that terrain in Colorado.
Yeah.
In fact, the trail that you hike in to get there, this whole slope right here 3 years ago was hit by tons of avalanches, and massive amounts of trees on the trail. Just you couldn't even hike it. I mean, it was impassable. So yeah,
I've seen that Colorado Trail. Is that something that runs through a large area of Colorado, or just it seems like such a broad name?
Yeah, the Colorado Trail. Yeah, Colorado Trail goes, you can see the yellow little icons here. It ends in Durango, where I live, and it follows all the way up here, and goes all the way through the mountains. And you can see it actually eventually goes all the way up and all the way to Denver.
Oh, wow.
It starts all the way up here in Denver.
Oh, wow. Massive.
Yeah. So it's, I think it's like 450 miles or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. I have not done it. I've done sections of it. Like, this is a section I did of it. This turquoise one. That was a fun little hike. Start at this. I did it in reverse. But that was like a 3-day backpack.
Yeah, I like it.
We spend a lot of time out in the field, Matt. If all of those squiggly lines are from since 2017, that's very, very impressive.
Yeah. That's a lot of it was to finish my goal of climbing the highest 100 mountains in Colorado. So
yeah,
I was very busy in those last 2 years. Yeah, like this trip. This was like
how many of those summits were clear, Matt?
What's that?
How many of those summits were clear?
Oh, what do you mean?
Like visibly clear, like
You can see
here
the view
most of the
often.
mountains that I know of, it's
Oh, yeah.
like you got to be
Yeah.
lucky.
I'm pretty, how would I say this? I'm pretty conservative when it comes to weather windows. I usually don't go out unless I know the weather is going to be decent. And it's a fairly predictable weather pattern here in Southwest Colorado. Basically from mid-July through the end of August, it's basically monsoons in the afternoons. So if you get up early, you can get a lot of mileage done, and then make sure you're down below tree line, before noonish, to avoid lightning. This particular year that I did this one, the biggest problem was smoke from forest fires. We've been having a lot of that here in Colorado.
I've been into Denver and Colorado a few times, and one thing that struck me is I've never seen so much lightning in my life, and it's I didn't realize how consistent a factor it is, and particularly around the edges of the plateaus. Like, do you want to speak to why that's the case, and how you have to sort of keep your mindset around that for what you do?
Well, I'm not totally a weather expert. I should probably know more, but my understanding is that, the hot air comes in from Utah, out here. And as it builds up, it's pushing against the cold air, which is then creating that pressure. And then it creates the conditions for the lightning to strike, which my understanding is lightning actually strikes from the ground up. But yeah, that's my understanding of it, is that it's based on the temperature differences and the jet stream and things like that.
In terms of places in the world, like I remember literally every night you'd sit in a certain spot and you'd watch the light show. Like it was a consistent, regular thing at certain times of the year, which is quite unusual. And certainly in Australia, it's actually quite rare and certainly not consistent at all. So that's partly why it's not something we have in a mindset regularly. That's something you have to worry about.
No,
except maybe it's fire season.
Yeah, it's pretty regular occurrence for sure. Yeah.
Do you have to worry about any like wildlife? Like, I don't know, it might sound ignorant. Is there any bears or anything like that, or?
There's definitely mountain lions and black bears. I fortunately have never really had any interactions with either of them. I guess I'm just lucky.
I always have to laugh. People say how you would never be in Australia because of how dangerous it is, but we don't have bears or lions or anything that can sort of jump out and grab us as we're walking.
Oh yeah,
along.
but you guys have snakes and scorpions and all kinds.
Yeah, they're fine, man.
Yeah, we deal with snakes. Yeah.
I was going to say you might have been in the crosshairs of a few mountain lions, Matt. You just have you never know.
I probably have, yeah.
Oh God.
Actually, when this particular climb right here, the reason why the colors are so jacked up is because there was so much smoke in the air, and then the sunrise was diffusing it all into these really funky oranges and purples and stuff. It was just really weird. But this is from the summit of the 5th highest mountain in Colorado, called Uncompahgre Peak, which has a fantastic view, as you can see. But over here is a 14er called Wetterhorn Peak, and then this one right here is called Coxcomb. This is Red Cliff, and then
Pano, Matt?
What's that?
Is it a Pano?
It is a Pano, yeah.
Yeah, I assume so. Looks a bit like Iceland, the coloration and aesthetic.
Yeah, it's this was in, gosh, this must have been in early July, late June, if I remember correctly, and it was on a year where there wasn't a ton of snow, so there was a lot of melted, a lot of green. But yeah, this is this is the my playground. These kind of scenes here. I've spent a lot of time backpacking and hiking in this area. This particular summit, when we're looking down this valley here, you might not be able to tell, but there's a valley on the other side of this, and then there's this valley, and it creates this. There are like these two glaciated valleys, and I figured out that I could, you can't see it very well because of the haze, but there's a mesa up here where I could get a view up both of those
Oh, right.
up both of these valleys. And then that is how I created this photograph. So this mountain here in the upper left is from where I took that last photo.
Wow.
So that's one of the things I love about mountain photography is, as a mountain climber, is that I'm like, oh, I took that photo from the top of that mountain, and here's a photo I took from that mountain, and it just comes
real life 3D.
Yeah, it just becomes addictive because you're like, oh, I remember that I had that really awesome trip and I went up there, and oh yeah, that was cool. So that's another thing I love about mountain photography is that every photograph is a memory of another trip. Or
so that was in the
trips.
fall, that one with the orangey color.
Yeah, with the
beautiful.
These are aspen trees. Yep.
Yeah, right. Just for terminology, for us Australians, what is a mesa? I mean, we see lots of mesa descriptions in the United States. What is it?
So, good question.
Probably obvious to our American viewers.
So a mesa is like an elevated plateau. So like this is a mesa where you have cliffs on this side, and then the rest of it's just flat. So it's a big flat area that's high.
Right. Yep.
Probably call it an escarpment or something like that.
We're high up by plateau, maybe.
Yeah, just a plateau here.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't have it.
Really quite refined and they stand out as a feature on their own rather than just a big plateau there. They're a bit more visible from side on as a singular feature.
So that'll be a mesa on the top left of that photograph.
So interestingly not. That is, I guess you could make an argument that it is, but it's actually a mountain because on one side of it, and it's actually this mountain, Sheep Mountain. So it comes up it ramps up kind of like this. And then on one side it has cliffs, and on this side it's more like probably that, 45 degrees.
Yep.
But yeah, so that's actually a mountain.
Right.
It's a 13,000 foot mountain actually.
The scale is just so different.
So strong knees, Matt.
Yeah, well, someday they'll go out on me. Let's see, what else do we want to talk about?
Are they mostly day hikes you do, Matt, or you tend to be doing some camping near the summits and that sort of thing?
I do a lot of day hikes, yeah, or I'll backpack. So like, I actually don't think I sent you guys the file, but I came back to this spot last summer.
By backpack, you mean overnight?
Yeah.
That's different terminology from us. So.
Oh, yeah. What do you guys call it?
Camping.
Oh, okay. Yeah, camping for us is like you throw all your stuff in a car and you sleep in your car, or you sleep in a tent by your car.
Yeah, right.
You probably call it like a multi-day or something.
Yeah, multi-day.
Multi-day bushwalk was probably
Yeah, bushwalk is what we call hiking here in
or tramping in New Zealand.
Yeah, and then in the UK they call it walking.
And New Zealand it's tramping.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I prefer
Get your
hiking.
chili bins out and after you go.
Trimping, bro.
See.
Hey, trimping.
So, one of the things that I think I was hoping to talk to you guys about is that kind of my evolution as a photographer. So, early in my journey, I was much more focused on, the scenes like we just saw, or like this one, where it was all about getting to the top of a mountain before sunrise and then photographing that first light hitting the peaks. That's what I lived for. Every summer, that's all I would try to do is photograph that type of stuff. And as I got more and more into photography, I wanted to first of all photograph these mountains that I love from different vantage points, not from the tops of other mountains, mostly so that you could have more foreground features, or maybe sleep in a little bit. But then also,
before we go a little bit forward, that question I asked you before early on, like, why the mountains? What is it about mountains that draws you up in the first place? That might sort of thread through the rest of your conversation. But what drives you in the first place to be up here? What are the qualities or characteristics or experiential or even kind of like soul-based aspects that pull you into this country and get you out of bed at 2 a.m. to do this sort of stuff in the first place? You know, what does it do to you? How do you feel it, and how does it impact you that keeps you going and gets you motivated enough to do it?
Man, it's hard to describe. You know, there's really nothing else like the feeling you get after putting in the hard work and then getting to a scene like this and watching the light unfold before your eyes. You know, you have this duality where not only do you have this immense sense of accomplishment and pride, and you know, you feel that adrenaline rush or that you know, that runner's high that you get from exercise, that dopamine hit, but then you also have this incredible alpine experience where you're watching something unfold before you that is just, it's so hard to replicate. It, you know, it's clean, it's pure, it's magic. It's there's just nothing else quite like it in life. And so, you know, I learned that from an early age. You know, the first time I got to the top of a mountain, you could look out all around you and see all these other mountains in all directions. It's just this amazing experience. And then to then couple that with, you know, the qualities of light that you get at sunrise and sunset, at sunrise and sunset, it's just an indescribable feeling. So
would you say that generally there's a little bit more risk involved in sunset shots and sunrise shots in terms of, you know, the exposure and what you have to deal with, you know, after and before the shot?
You know, you would think so. It's more dangerous for sunset photos because you're climbing down in the dark and it's really hard to see. Whereas when you're climbing up in the dark, it's not, for whatever reason, it's just not as hard, you know, because you're like, well, I can't go that way. I'd have to go this way. But when you're coming down in the dark, it's just, you know, you're tired because you've already climbed up all that distance. And you can't, you're just not as aware of the dangers below you. And so I take a lot more care coming down in the dark than when I do coming up in the dark.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Yeah. Let's see if I have one here. Yeah, like like this one. This was sunset, and this is actually of that mountain I showed you before, Vestal Peak with that sweeping ridge. And I had climbed up to a mountain across the way from it. Let's see if I can pull that up again. Here we are. I was actually, well, you can see my tracks. I was actually right there on the side of the mountain looking that way. But to get there, though, it was super steep, up these jumbled boulders, and coming down it in the dark was pretty terrifying.
Yeah, when I see really exposed alpine photography at sunset, my hackles go back up because I've got just enough of an understanding to know what they might have been in for after that photograph, and what they might have been risking or exposing themselves to.
Yeah, I've had a few close calls. Actually, in 2010, I think it was 2010, I climbed that mountain, which is called Arrow Peak, and photographed from the top of it at sunset, and then had to come down it. And you come down that snow-covered ridge or rib right there, and it was pretty terrible in the dark. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it.
Things to find ourselves doing for photography, hey?
But Matt, with that in mind, how much of what you do is solo as opposed to having either a climbing partner or somebody with you, which is always a challenge for any wilderness photographer, especially if they're not a photographer?
Yeah, I would say it's probably 50-50.
Okay.
Yeah, probably 50-50.
Have you been out doing much exploring with your son at all, or is it sort of a bit early days for that sort of thing?
Yeah, he's been on a few trips with me. He enjoys it to a certain degree, but you know, he's not into getting up super early or anything like that. So, but he's done a few hikes with me and had a good time.
Awesome.
What a beautiful photo.
Yeah,
It's incredible.
Yeah, so this is a fairly classic scene of Mount Snuffles, a 14,000 foot mountain here in Colorado.
Mount Snuffles.
Mount Snuffles, yeah.
Nice.
But most people photograph it. You can see the road down there.
Mm.
That road, if you can imagine, it actually wraps around the valley behind us. And most people just photograph the scene from the road. But my friend Kane and I, what we did is we hiked way back up here onto a different ridge to get a different perspective of a more classic scene that most people haven't quite seen before. So that's another thing I try to do with my photography is, I'm not opposed to shooting icons, but I try to do it in a way that might be different or from a different vantage point that might be, might surprise you or might just be like, oh, that's a little different. So
yeah, it's good to not do a cover band, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's okay if you want to sound like the Rolling Stones, but don't play their music. Yeah.
No, I subscribe to that too. There's nothing wrong with the beautiful scene, but it's always good to do your own work on it.
Yeah.
I'm always fascinated by the autumn or fall photographs in the United States, because here in Australia we don't have deciduous trees in the sort of abundance that you guys do. We've got a very special one here in Tasmania that we love called the fagus, but it's up high in the mountains and can be pretty fickle with the weather blowing the leaves off very quickly.
It's pretty rare too.
Yeah.
Wise, it's very small pockets. It's very hard to catch.
Yeah, but it is wonderful. But I think I've noticed in the last maybe 5 or 6 years that the fall photography of Colorado has got a lot more popular, or I've just seen more images. A lot of these aspen trees and certainly a lot of closed-in sort of detail forest shots of aspen trees. Is that something you've noticed as well, Matt, or am I just throwing one out?
No,
there?
I don't think you're imagining anything. It's definitely becoming more popular. Although for those of us that have lived in Colorado most of our lives, we've been photographing those scenes for decades, and so it's always funny to see people coming in from other parts of the country teaching workshops in our backyard. And, I don't know, that's a whole other topic of conversation, that territorialism and, people like,
I was a bit curious about that kind of stuff, to be honest.
Yeah, it's I don't know, it's like a sticky subject because a lot of people who have been photographing Colorado for a really long time have put in a lot of work to do the scouting to find some of these places. And then there's an instance of a particular photographer here who started a Facebook group for Colorado Fall Color, where basically for the sole intent of just gathering location information so that they could teach workshops there. And so so we see a lot of that kind of stuff happening in Colorado, is what it is, I guess. But I know a lot of my friends who've been photographing Colorado fall for very, very many years, they get annoyed by that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I guess it's a worldwide phenomenon where the internet has brought a lot of these previously unknown locations right to the fore.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, like, this is an example of trying to get away from that, though. So, fortunately, my really good friend Kane is obsessed with Google Earth, and he basically spends hours and hours and hours looking for tiny little nooks and crannies with vantage points of familiar scenes that we know about, but maybe with a twist or things like that. So this is a scene that he actually found on Google Earth that we went and hiked up to a few years ago, and we got greeted by one of those sunsets that just like never stops, like the light just kept going and going and going and going for literally like 2 hours. just because it kept bouncing, off the atmosphere.
Now, have you been dealing with a lot of smoke as a fallout of the California fires and other sort of fires going on in the last few months?
Yeah, it's been pretty bad. I'm hoping that it clears out because I have a 10-day trip coming up here for fall, so I'm hoping it clears up a bit.
I'm guessing you would have had maybe months of it on and off, yeah?
Yeah, it's like supposedly in Denver, they haven't seen the mountains in like 3 months.
Whoa.
Oh, wow.
Jeez.
Jeez, I knew
Yeah,
it was
it's-
bad, but not
Holy
that bad,
crap.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly something we're familiar with here too. It's a changing climate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, this is an example of like this particular scene. If we were to disclose the exact location of this scene, it would just get overrun with a bunch of people from out of state. So we've seen that happen over and over again with particular locations that really can't sustain visitation. And so people ask us, where was that taken? And if it's someplace where we know people could get to it easily and it can't really handle visitation, then we just don't tell people. If it's
so I was just saying, where's that line map? There's not telling people where it is, and do you not present that photograph in the first place? Like where is the line between one and the other? Because that's a bit of a tricky one. Because you've gone to all this effort and you created an amazing image, and it is somewhere special and unique and vulnerable. Like, I mean, where's that line of responsibility? Do you just keep it to yourself altogether, or do you just try and minimize it just by lack of information about how to get there?
In my experience, for the most part, even if you have a pretty large social media following, if you don't give people the exact location, 95% of people are too lazy to figure it out on their own. Just being honest. And so I'm not too worried about people seeing images from places like that. Because I know that for the most part, people aren't going to put in the work to try to figure it out. Now, there's always going to be, Google Earth is free. Anyone can get on Google Earth and figure out where I took this photograph, but I doubt many people will try.
Yeah, there's no point making it easy for people if just withholding a name or two can drastically change how difficult it is for someone to work it out, I suppose, isn't it? So, yeah.
Right. And I think most people who photograph Colorado in autumn could probably figure out where this area is. But this exact spot, very unlikely. That's just my personal take.
It's definitely.
Hopefully my friend Kane doesn't watch, because he'll probably be like, why did you tell people about that photo?
That's a problem everywhere, that one. It's an interesting one.
Yeah.
So you're saying we've gone off track a bit, but we're talking about your evolving journey, Matt. So the classic scenes that you're talking about, and where did you move, or where are you moving from there? What's drawing you in now with photography?
Yeah, truthfully, I didn't really get into that whole idea of shooting icons until I moved to Oregon. And really I did it because I had zero knowledge of Oregon. So I knew nothing about what was even around me to photograph. So I basically started researching what other people were photographing as a way to find places to photograph. But what I found through that particular that way of making images is that it was just, for me, it wasn't very fulfilling. And actually that photo we talked about earlier, this one, I didn't have any idea that this photograph existed or that this scene was here. I had actually came to this area. It was my third or fourth time to this area. And I knew about all the kind of classic shots that everyone else had already gotten, that I had already gotten. And I was just kind of bored with it. And I wanted to just try to find something new that was unique to me. And I knew that meant that I could completely fail. I could go on a hike and come home with nothing. But that was a much I was much happier with that than just getting the same photograph that I already had before, that a whole bunch of other people already had, because it just wasn't fulfilling to me. So I just started hiking up this random trail I found on the side of the road. And when I got all the way to the top of this area, I found this scene, and I was just blown away that this was even here. I'd never seen anyone else photograph this particular scene before. Now, a couple people have copied my shot since then, but that's okay. But the point is, yeah, it's fine. But the point is that when you're able to find something on your own and make it your image that you created, that was completely without any inspiration from another person, obviously that comes with a ton of risk of failure. But when the results come through, it's just super satisfying, you know, as a photographer. You feel like you've actually created something instead of copying something, right? There's a difference between tracing a drawing on a piece of paper than actually creating a new drawing from scratch, right? So I feel like that's kind of the difference between the two approaches. If you're going to compare it to a different type of art, maybe drawing. So
is this like a 5 or 6 like vertical pano? Like what's your process?
Yeah, it's a I want to say it's a 7 photo telephoto pano.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Do you think when you went to Oregon, and you know, obviously you didn't have much knowledge of the area, you sort of fell back on the icon approach just to sort of become familiar with the place, and then gradually sort of migrated from there?
You know, I think that's probably accurate. However, I didn't really know that that's what I was doing. It's mostly in hindsight that I'm able to kind of realize that that's what was happening. And when I look back on it, and I think back on the images that I created, probably 70% of them, I mean, they're fine, but there's not much of me in those photographs. You know, there's not, like, I don't have much to say, like, I'm super proud that I created those photos. You know, it's like, oh, I just went to that spot that everyone else shoots from and got the same photo that everyone else also already has. So I just didn't, and actually, because of how unfulfilling that was to me, I was thinking about quitting photography back in like 2016.
Oh, wow.
I'm glad I didn't, but that's kind of, that approach was just very tiring to me. And so I'm glad that I took the risk to just go out and hike a trail and hopefully find something. And so that was a really good start of a stretch for me. I started finding more scenes like this, where I would, you know, find things just on the ground on the forest floor that was arranged in a pattern. And so I'm finding myself more and more drawn to these types of scenes now, where it's not of a iconic grand vista, but it's a photograph that I found and that I was able to make. Now I was clued in because my friend David Kingham, who I was with, was like looking on the ground. He had found something. So I give all the credit to him. But
those leaves are quite distinctive. I've seen them in a few different pictures. What kind of tree are they from?
Yeah, that's from an aspen tree.
Oh, it's an aspen leaf. Okay.
Yeah.
But did you notice a cultural difference between the photographic community in Colorado versus Oregon?
Oh, interesting.
Were you there long enough to sort of get a bit of a sense? So I know you've already talked a little bit about territorialism in Colorado. Like I'm curious about the community aspects of the different sort of areas of the states, and they're two preeminent areas for landscape photographers in America.
Yeah. I would say
is it generally quite inclusive, or are people very individualistic? Is it community-based? Is it a real mix?
You know, I would say that the Pacific Northwest has a lot more acceptance or just it's more common to find people that are heavy into digital manipulation and editing and things like that. I mean, think about it. That's where Mark Adamus lives. That's where Ryan Dyer lives. That's where Miles Morgan used to live. You know, all of those guys came out of the Pacific Northwest. And I think, I don't know why that was the case. Maybe it's the types of images that you find in that part of the world. I don't know, but I think there's a little bit of that style, that kind of
Yeah,
West Coast
to me, that's
style.
a cultural aspect. There's a lot of influence from within and through the community in that regard. Because I've really noticed that about that area of the States as well, and photographers that come out of there, and the stylization that's sort of rippled around that community quite a lot.
Right. Yeah, that West Coast style. Yeah. It's almost like East Coast, West Coast rap, right?
Yeah, sometimes even see
It's a
Australian
big country.
photographers sort of going with that style as well, and you can see the influence there as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, you certainly can tell who's purchased a Ryan Dyer tutorial.
Yeah.
Bit of light bleed here and
I
there.
haven't done that
Yeah, a
yet.
little light bleed going.
It's interesting. I call it the American style, which is probably a little bit generalist, but it has been interesting to see how the influence of those particular photographers that you're talking about and other similar photographers has had on the landscape photography community in general, and the type of trends that it's produced. And I sort of talk about the American style, and then I sort of talk about the British style as being completely different. And it's a really interesting sort of thing to observe. And I don't know, is it a younger photographers more drawn to a particular style as opposed to older photographers that have been around and have their own style and can't be changed for love nor money? Or
So I think there's a couple things. I've actually thought a lot about this, Nick. I think from what I understand in the United Kingdom and a lot of Europe, there really isn't a lot of demand for photography on people's walls in terms of art.
Right.
I think that's there is a little bit of that, but you don't have those huge high-end galleries of people like Peter Lick or that doesn't exist over there.
Yeah.
From what I understand.
Yeah.
And so I think what we've seen is that art galleries and that commercialization of photography from that perspective has become, or at least in the 90s and the 2000s, was a huge part of the photography path that people took, was selling prints in galleries and things like that. And then I think because of that, what we've seen is that there was a lot of social media platforms where those people were putting their work and it was getting seen internationally, like on 500px.
Yeah.
Like that was the work that kept rising to the top.
Yeah.
And so that's the type of work that people wanted to copy and emulate. So I think what we're seeing is kind of a downstream effect of the value of commercialization of photography as a digital art form, as opposed to in the United Kingdom, where that just isn't a thing.
Yeah, interesting observation actually about the different. You've talked a lot on your podcast about art shows. I mean, I don't even know what an art show is. We don't have. I mean, we probably have an equivalent, and it might be the terminology, but I'm just not quite sure what an art show is. But you've had a lot of photographers talk about being on the art show circuit.
Right, that's so funny.
Yeah.
So imagine a city that you live in closing down one of its most major streets for like 4 blocks, and then making it to where cars can't drive on it. And then the city or whoever's running the event sells booth slots all along the street where people set up tents, canvas like circus tents that are smaller, like maybe 10 by 10. And then you hang up all your work on the walls of your tent. And then they advertise this big art show event. And then people from your city come in and they buy artwork from all the artists that are showing at the art show.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I guess we do have sort of things on a very small scale like that, but yeah, obviously it's a big thing in the United States to put on these almost sort of traveling festivals of art.
Well, yeah, Nick, I mean, we've got all of these millionaires with these huge houses that, you know, they have to put something on their wall. Come on, man.
Yeah. No, that's really, it's really cool. I mean, it's great to have that that platform and that audience. And I guess I'm just a very sheltered Tasmanian.
Well, I mean, we have our makers market. Oh, excuse me. We have our makers markets and things like that, but yeah, it's certainly not on that sort of scale.
Yeah. Oh wow, look at that.
Yeah, so we were talking about kind of the types of scenes that I'm more drawn to now is kind of these intimate scenes, and that location we were just talking about with the glaciated valleys that I've been to many times. This is actually from down in that valley also, but it's right from a very classic scene, only I just turned around and the light was hitting these leaves and these trees in just the right way. And
Matt,
so
what was involved in your transition to opening up into these sort of more scene related and detail related works? Like you talked a little bit about these other photographers, but you haven't really talked about any personal influences from yourself. Like, it sounds like a lot of your earlier work was very self-driven. And you do go out with friends, but how much have you noticed yourself being influenced by other people's work, or do you have any inspirations from past photographers that have sort of directed some of these changes, for instance?
Yeah, well, I'd say a big part of my influence has come from hanging out with a couple of photographers when I do my fall color trips. One of them is Jimmy Gekas. He's a photographer from San Diego. Comes out to Colorado every fall to photograph fall colors, and almost every year we meet up with him at some point, mostly because he's also a huge lover of beer. So there's nothing better than going out all day making images and then coming back around the campfire and sharing beers and sharing stories and stuff like that. So Jimmy is one of them. His good friend Brent Dorsman, who's also a Colorado-based photographer, who basically all he photographs is Colorado fall colors once a year. That's all he does. Those are the only photos he makes, pretty much.
Oh wow.
And then I've been, and then through my podcast, I've been studying the work of a lot of really fantastic photographers over the last 5 years. People like William Neal, people like Charlotte Gibb, people that really like those tighter, more intimate scenes. And I just find myself, for one, what I like about these types of scenes is that you can't really copy it. I mean, you could, but it's because it's a telephoto lens, and you have to be at a very specific meadow at the very specific time at a very specific time of year. It'd be very difficult to replicate that composition. So I have a high appreciation for those types of images because it gives you more of a canvas through which you can put yourself into it. Yeah. So I've just become more and more drawn to that type of stuff.
Yeah, that really rings true for me as well. That these more intimate shots are really your own. They're difficult to copy. They're difficult for you to have seen other work that might be similar or whatever, and then try and replicate it. So you're looking for your own stuff. You're not influenced by others, other than the fact that that intimate style is what you're after. It really becomes your own stamp, I suppose. And something
I'd suggest, like, the physicality of a small scene is so much more dynamic. Like those leaves could be gone tomorrow with a bit of wind, and whereas the large grander scenes, apart from the weather and the light, they're going to be fairly similar for decades in a row. Outside of the seasonal sort of changes in the foliage. So whereas something underfoot or in an intimate aspect is so dynamic and always changing that that's part of it, I think.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why photographing on a beach is so much fun.
Yes.
Not photographing the actual, the waves. And I mean, the waves are dynamic in their own, and that's a great genre of photography that I love doing as well. But just looking down at the sand and the patterns are different every day. If the wind is blown overnight, suddenly you've got these formations. If the tide's gone out and run through certain cracks in the rock and the sand, it's different, it's changed, and
Right.
you know, the more you look, the more you find.
Right, and I think that's what I love about this type of photography too, is that it forces you to pretty much drop all of your expectations about what you're going to get, which I think for me has been a lifesaver. You know, I spent so many years chasing scenes, chasing conditions, hoping, oh man, I hope there's clouds tonight, you know, like, or I hope there's clouds that scene, and it's really painful when there's not, right? Because you have this expectation of what you're going to find. And so nowadays I almost have zero expectations when I go out, and I'm much more open to, you know, oh, look at that. Like in this, you were talking about the beach. I was on the California coast back in May, and near the redwoods, and I was walking along the beach, and I saw this piece of driftwood on the beach, and I was like, oh my God, look at all those wild textures and patterns on the wood that have, I think that's like some kind of weird moss or something that's growing on it. Yeah. And so I was like, this is an amazing scene. And so I got my macro lens out, and I think I played with that stupid piece of wood for like an hour, you know, but it was so fun because, you know, if I would have gone there just to shoot a sea stack, then I would have made that photo of that sea stack, and then I would have hiked back to my car, and I would have been disappointed because there were no clouds or whatever. So
you can create your own scene so well. And we had we're looking at a shot a couple weeks ago of and it turned out to be a thistle. We had no idea what we were looking at, and I think that's kind of one of those what you were talking about too, Paul, about aerial photography and how you know the perspective can be totally lost, and you can make the image into what you would like it to be, I suppose, in your mind, which is kind of cool. Yeah,
aerial photography is really fantastic.
Yeah, I thought this could have easily been like almost like a water-based scene where you've got, you know, emerging of, you see some of those. I think Eric does some beautiful ones of swirling,
like the foam,
almost like oils in the water, surfaces of the water and things like that. Like apart from looking in really close to seeing the texture, that was my first impression for a scene.
Yeah, isn't it? That's what I love about it too. It's like, what is that? Yeah,
there is always something to photograph if you tune your eye in and start you know, looking around and observing nature closely. You'll always find something to photograph, no matter what the light is doing, no matter what the clouds are doing. There's something there, and you should never really. I mean, I used to go away disappointed from, you know, I'm heading out for a sunset and I'm going to, you know, the sunset's going to be great. And then the sunset's awful and you feel disappointed and you go home. But nowadays, you know, I'll go out thinking, oh, yeah, it might be a nice sunset. But even if it's not, I'm looking for something to photograph that's intimate, that's close, that may or may not work. And I nearly always come away with something that I'm happy with, no matter what the conditions are doing, because I am focusing a little more on those details. And I think for, you know, budding landscape photographers out there, if you do adjust your mindset a little bit, then you can probably avoid those disappointments.
Yeah, I think it's almost like a natural evolution in a way, isn't it, Nick? Where you sort of start to realise that there's a lot more to it than just the grand scenes, and I'm certainly been on that journey myself, and really appreciate it too. So
I thought that was Bridlewell Falls from the thunder size.
Oh,
map. And you were talking about the disappointment of shooting iconic scenes and so on, but it wasn't until you blew it up I realised it's totally different.
Interestingly, it's actually the same location.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yeah, so this was a cloudless evening. Yeah, this is a cloudless evening, and that's the face of El Cap.
Wow. Oh, wow.
So it's just like the very last light hitting this tiny rib of granite on the face of El Cap, and I use like a 400 millimeter lens to zoom in on it and get all the texture of the granite and the light just kissing the little tip
you
of
thought
that.
about climbing it, Matt?
No, not that is way beyond my abilities.
Yeah, I got to be friends that have. I was sat at the bottom a number of times and just gobsmacked myself at the people's almost like the arrogance of even thinking they can take that on. Like, oh my god.
Oh, I know. You look up at it and you're like,
It's
that
so hard
is
to
amazing.
describe to people, or even photograph it in a way that people can understand the size and the length and of an undertaking it is to do that.
Certainly a
Yeah, the
bucket list
scale.
location for me. It sounds amazing. Yeah.
Oh,
You've got
it's,
to do it, Lucky. You've got to do it. It's world class, isn't it?
Yeah. No, I'm well overdue for a US trip.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful photograph.
There's only 2 million people that go on there every year.
so this is another example of like just hiking through the woods in fall. And yeah, those are probably 2-3 day old bear claws.
Is that a territorial thing, or they just like
there was a beehive up in the tree,
gotcha.
so he was trying to get to the honey.
Oh wow!
Yeah, these claws went all the way up the tree.
We have similar shots from koalas as well. Actually, got to be really careful. They'll drop out of the trees onto you.
Drop bears, man, they're gnarly.
Oh dear. We might have to explain that one, Luke.
Oh no, it's just we always Aussies have a joke about drop bears where koalas will drop out of the trees, because I think our animals aren't scary enough, so we need to just take it a little bit further sometimes. It's one of the favorites.
Yeah, koalas are almost completely harmless, by the way.
Well, in this case, I was actually like, oh, I wonder if that bear is close, because they look pretty fresh.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't have been keen, but I don't know. I don't know bears. I mean, that's the thing. We're so ignorant about bears.
I found out about bears, and
your story's terrifying, Paul.
I got plenty of stories, but I won't go to the now because it's Matt's show. But what I am curious about is, where is the line between black bears and grizzlies? Because grizzlies are the ones that will freaking kill you without a sideways glance. Black bears you can actually kind of scare off potentially, is my understanding.
Yeah,
where is the line in America where you get grizzlies as opposed to the black bears?
Yeah, I don't know that there's a line, although basically,
I'm just kind of curious.
Basically, well, hey, look, we have a map. So Colorado has no grizzly bears at all.
Yeah.
My understanding is that there is some grizzly bears in the Winds in Wyoming.
Okay.
Up here.
Oh, the Windies. Oh, I almost went into the Windies last time I was there. They're incredible.
And then there's definitely grizzlies in Yellowstone.
So Nick, just from, well, you corrected me because I'm a little bit more ignorant than you living there. But my understanding is the risk factor around one and the other is quite different, and your approach to the bears is also quite different, Nick. So it's good to have awareness as to what kind of bears you're likely to come across and the kind of behaviours and preparation with food and equipment that you want to have in response to either. Is that kind of fair enough, Matt?
Yeah, although, I mean, you don't want a bear in your camp or in your food. So, even though Outside Magazine and all those, they have like all these articles saying like it's pointless to do a bear hang or whatever. I still do a bear hang when I go backpacking, just mostly because there's also other animals that can get into your food. So, I hang my food like, I don't know, 100 feet away from my campsite. I don't keep any of my food in my tent or my backpack.
Yep.
Once I've set up my site, I've never had an encounter with a bear, but I think that's because I'm pretty cautious about that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think if I were ever to do some stuff in Yellowstone or, up here, like up in, where am I? Up in Glacier. Like I would definitely bring bear spray, all that kind of stuff, because
Great Bear Wilderness Area.
yeah, it's legit up there. I mean, that's they will definitely kill you for sure. Yeah. Whereas in black bears, you can get attacked by black bears in Colorado, but it's the only time that's going to happen is if you are like between them and their cubs, or if you like scare the crap out of it and you're really close, But it's super uncommon. Although a lady got killed by one this year about 20 minutes from my house, but it's very rare. It's pretty uncommon.
I literally saw them walking through the car park in Yosemite in broad daylight, and I got yelled at and at about 1:30 in the morning from a camp ranger in Yosemite, and I had to get up and move my tent, and I had gunshots. Like it's.
Oh gosh.
It was a time of the year where food was really scarce, and they were coming down into the valley, and obviously there's it's a rich source of food depending on which way they look at people and what they're carrying with them. But yeah, it depends how desperate they are and how their food sources are going as well.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. I was trying to think what else. Scenes like this I've been getting more and more into, just finding really weird leaves and finding an interesting.
It looks like a neon light bulb's
going. Yeah, just I call this one fallen electricity.
Yes, how does that luminosity is insane.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's.
So that's an aspen as well, that one?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, wow.
Really? Yeah, you can find some pretty wild colors in the aspen trees.
Did somebody give it acid?
Yeah. I mean, you might say I was doing acid when I processed it, but actually that was it's pretty true to what I actually saw.
Wow.
But interestingly, so this was a fallen, I think this was a pine tree on the grounds that had maybe been it had been kind of eroded over time, and I actually took some of my water and I got the log wet to give it more of that dark blue color. Otherwise, it would have been just like brown and gray. So I wanted that color contrast between the red and the yellow and the blue. So Magic. I guess you could say it's not natural, but
you've given pouring water on a log, I don't think is going to cause any harm.
Yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it? It's also like similar to picking up a movable object that's clearly not a habitat or something like that as well. To I guess clean up a scene, it's kind of where there's obviously a grey area there too, where you got to be careful. But yeah, if it's not going to cause any damage, it's hard to see how that could be a problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the leaf was already in the ground. It's not like I picked it or anything. So, and it would have fallen out of the tree in like 2 seconds anyway. So,
yeah.
I still enjoy high alpine mountain scenes like this one. I took this one this year.
Wow.
This was a bunch of yellow paintbrush, and I've always wanted to get a photograph of this type of paintbrush at the last moment of light, because they have all these little hairs
the backlight
on them, and then they catch that backlight and glow red. So I've always wanted to get a shot like that.
Mate, you haven't done one of those freakish focal blends. Think good on you.
Yeah, like the perspective blending.
Use your 12 mil on the foreground and your 200 on the background and blend it all together. So it's
actually really good control of the sun there too. Just to obviously you've done well with the exposure blending there. It's fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this was actually, it was a focus stack and it was an exposure blend, but maybe I think it was a three or four image focus stack and a 2 image exposure blend. I think 2 or 3.
Do you have many wildflowers in Colorado, like particularly more alpine or higher up wildflowers? Or?
Yeah, I mean, these ones are like this is at 13.4.
Wow.
Yeah. So are they actually flowers or buds? Are they flowers?
Yeah, these are flowers.
Yeah.
I can tell too. They look halfway in between.
Yeah.
I love the name, paintbrush. What a brilliant name for them.
Yeah. Yellow paintbrush. Yeah, it's one of my favorite flowers up in the high alpine. But we've got
it's a narrow season for them, Matt, to find them flowering.
Oh yeah, it's all this time. It's basically mid-July to mid-August.
Yeah, just
Columbine, is it?
Yeah, and these are Columbine. Same type of timing. I think I made this photo 2 weeks before that other one. So yeah, it's a pretty short window when you can catch them, and they're not like chewed up or brown or whatever,
It's really lovely too to take these sort of more intimate shots, because it also helps to tell a story of the landscape too, doesn't it? And it's, rather than just seeing the big grand scene, you can also see all of the lovely bits of detail that kind of help to tell more of a greater picture of the area, which I always appreciate.
Yeah, it's something I'm getting more and more into, although I'm sure, as you would agree, Luke and Nick, it's really hard to compose those types of photographs. It's, you know, like you see them and you're like, how do I make a photograph out of those? You know, it's not,
and it's also
not easy.
Determining if you want it to be selectively focused or you want to stack the whole thing, and if you've got the patience to stack it all, and if it's windy and
The wind
you've got the right lenses, and you know you're probably tired and just come back from a hike, and you just last thing you want to do is sit down hunching over some flowers for an hour trying to make it work.
Oh man, it's so hard being a photographer.
It's the worst. It's the worst.
And and I think I didn't have my tripod on this trip, so I was I didn't have I couldn't focus stack really, so I just
that's another question. How much of your work is tripod based and how much isn't?
Oh, it's probably 90% tripod based.
Okay.
Oh yeah, that's a lot.
So I might have thought that given all the hiking you do, you might elect to leave the tripod behind just to save a little bit of weight.
Yeah.
No, I'm a glutton for punishment.
Man after my own heart with that.
Yeah,
sort of
144 a tripod, you'll know about that.
Do you have, I mean, it's you can't. I mean, this was well after dark. I mean, you can't make a photograph like this handheld at ISO 100. You know, it's just not possible.
I'll have a crack at it with my new R5, mate. 8-stop stabilization.
One thing I'm really keen to know, given that I do a bit of hiking myself, nothing like on your level, but firstly, like what sort of a base weight of sort of that you'd be looking to carry on a trip, and also like what lenses you might take as well from a creative perspective?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, so a lot of that depends on some different variables for the trip. So like most recently I did a trip where I knew I was gonna climb like 5 mountains in one day, because I'm taking a bunch of photographs for this book that I'm writing. That's like all my stuff is due in like a month. And so I knew that I was gonna be gaining a lot of elevation throughout the day. So I only had one lens. So it was the 24-105 f4.
Yep, beautiful lens.
Solid. I mean, could be better, but it's pretty great for what it is. And I did not. Oh wait, I did bring a tripod up there for that one. But you know, I think my pack weight, including water for the whole day, which was it was a 12-mile day. I think my pack weight was like 25 pounds for the day. But then to backpack into where I started from, I think my pack weight was around 35, 40. So it just depends. For a trip like this one, where I backpacked in to a base camp, and then I did a lot of side trips, I might bring my telephoto, which is a 100-400. I might bring the 24-105. And then if I'm doing any astro work, or if I'm going to do any like really wide angle stuff, I'll bring the Sigma 14-24 as well.
Oh, lovely. That's a great complement of lenses. So
yeah, it's pretty.
I'm eyeing up that lens, Matt. You like it?
I love it. Yeah,
it's kind of heavy though, isn't it?
What's your camera body?
Canon.
R5.
So so I don't know if they make one for the R5 yet, but I know the one that's for Sony.
I've got an adapter, but yeah.
The Sony one is slightly shorter and lighter than the one for.
Okay. Yeah.
Just a little.
Yeah, they're designed for mirrorless, Paul.
Oh, right.
So you need to have one that's actually made for the RF now.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so it's a little bit lighter and smaller than the one that you would get for like say the Nikon D850 or something, or the 5DSR.
And do you sort of compromise and have a lightweight tripod, or do you just say stuff it and take a solid one? Or
yeah, I've actually got a couple tripods. I can show them to you if you want.
I don't know if they're going to be the same size as yours, Nick.
And then you can compare it to Nick's.
Oh, yeah. Go away. You'll have to not screen share, Matt. turn
Oh
off his
yes,
screen
that's a good
share.
point. I can just kill that for him.
I got it.
Yeah.
Oh, you got it.
And you'll have to talk while you're showing them. So
Yeah.
So this is my main backpacking tripod. It's the Faisal Tournament 3442. You know, and I've got the it's an older tripod. I bought it in 2013, but they still make it. That's how good it is. I mean, it could be better, but honestly, unless you're gonna spend $1,600 on a really right stuff, this is probably about as good as you're gonna get. Because it weighs about 2 pounds.
Wow.
And then my ball head, which weighs 1 pound, is the Photo Clam, which nobody has this ball head, but it's awesome because it has a rotating base, but it also has a rotating head.
Ah.
So it's really great for pano work. Yeah, and it's
very lightweight for 2 pounds, like 1 kilogram.
Yeah, three
very
pounds
lightweight.
total. Yeah, it's not bad.
Yeah,
it's not bad at all.
What was the brand of tripod?
Faisal.
Yeah.
The
only photographer I know of down here that uses one is Jared Costain. That's the only person I've come across that uses one in Australia.
Yeah.
And then I've also got this is like for more day hike type stuff, or shooting from the car type stuff. It's a lot more sturdy than the Faisal, but it's a little bit heavier. And it's the Photo Pro Global Elite photographer. And it's cool because it has my signature on it, which is kind of because I'm a ambassador for them.
Cool.
But they make a good overall solid tripod. They just don't have a really good super lightweight backpacking tripod. So for me, it just depends on the trip I'm doing.
So I'm assuming you mentioned that your pack weight was around say 30 pounds, which is only about 13 kilos, which is actually pretty lightweight, I would have thought. Still, is that for overnight hikes as well, or is that just more day hikes?
Oh yeah, that's I can get it down to 30, 35 for like a 3 to 4 day backpacking trip.
Wow, that's very impressive.
And that includes water. That includes water and food as well. So
wow, you must be.
You're eating air or something.
You sleep outside.
No, I've got a tent.
Wow, yeah, you must be very good with the light weighting, which is something that I'm not very good at.
Well, most climbers are.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we have to be to be able to get up to those sort of heights of 4,000 meters and things like that. It's you can't muck around.
I've learned you find the hard way.
Not having been there, I remember moving up there and doing some hikes and doing some mountain biking, and it was twice as hard as I expected because just the base altitude is so much higher that the oxygen levels are so much lower than you're used to that it's actually really impactful. So if you're planning on going to visit Colorado and doing, multi-peak bagging days, you really want to be doing your training because it'll catch up with you pretty quick.
Yeah, if you were just to come here from the East Coast or West Coast without acclimating, you would definitely
struggle.
It would be tough. Even if you were in really good physical condition, you're probably going to hit the altitude wall quickly. But if you spend 2 or 3 days to acclimate, you should be fine. And drink a ton of water.
Is there much water up in the mountains, or?
Yeah, tons, heaps. Yeah.
A lot of ice melt, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, most years there is. I mean, it's less and less each year because of climate change. We're getting less and less snowpack.
Yeah, I had that question of mine actually. In your time, being out in specific areas regularly, you're more likely to notice the changes than other people. In your own lifetime, what have you noticed?
Yeah, I mean, there's good years and bad years for sure, and there's always going to be variation seasonally. But I would say, on average, the snowpack is significantly decreased since I've been a photographer, which is only since 2010. And we've also seen an impact to like the transition of fall, and also like when wildflowers peak.
Yep.
So normally you could like set your watch to the wildflowers peaking, mid-July to late July, and now it's usually sometimes it's like up to 2 weeks earlier than normal. And then fall color, it's all over the map. It's like 3 years ago, it was 2 weeks early, and then 2 years later, it was 2 weeks late. So it's just, there's a ton of variation now. And a lot of that's based on moisture and how dry it is through the summer. But yeah, the snowpack's the big one. I remember 2011 in July, it was like snow-covered peaks in all directions. And now in July, you can hike all those peaks without snow. So yeah, it's huge.
It's scary. We just had our one of our warmest winters on record down here as well. So it's not great at all. We've only probably got a few more minutes left, actually, Matt. I was just wondering if you had any sort of final images that you wanted to share with us or something like that.
I feel like we covered most of the images I wanted to talk about.
Awesome.
Cool. And yeah, I promise the reason I have these foam pads is not because I'm in an asylum or anything like that, padded walls. It's to reduce the echo in my room, which is still a little bit too echoey for my taste, but it's for the podcast.
I guess you need to do all those sort of soundproofing things for your show that you many episodes into. So it makes a lot of sense to get your area optimized for that.
Man, what keeps you going with your show? Like 230 shows is massive, and you've already probably covered a lot of topics and connected with a lot of different people. How do you sort of keep it fresh and the energy going, and where do you see it moving forward?
Oh man, it's so hard to keep it fresh. I mean, I get hate mail all the time from people saying like, "Oh, you already talked about that before," or "Why do you keep bringing that subject up?" And it's like, there's only so many things you can talk about.
Did they come to you with an actual suggestion, or just like to point the finger and just leave it there?
Sometimes they'll say something that's super obvious. Like
actually,
you can't keep everyone happy, can you?
I did want to talk about that, specific area, Matt, because you do talk about environmental stuff quite a bit on the podcast, and I know you've mentioned on the podcast before that you've had photographers, send you hate mail about, stop talking about climate change or stop talking about trampling on stuff. You've covered it before. We don't want to listen to it. We want to just listen about, photography, not the environment. Have you got any thoughts on that? I mean, you're a big advocate for those sort of topics, and and for me, I love hearing it every time. But how do you manage and navigate that sort of stuff?
Man, I wish I had a good answer for that question. It's I guess what I try to do is I try to put a twist on it. If I'm going to bring it up again, maybe it's, the good and bad thing about my podcast is that one of the things I do is I ask every guest what they're interested in talking about. And so, Nick, if you were to come on my show, based on what you just said, I'm pretty sure you'd probably say, one of the things I'd really like to talk about, Matt, is environmental issues in Australia. Yeah. And I'd be like, awesome. How can we put a twist on it though, Nick, so that it doesn't make it to where Matt doesn't get tons of hate mail saying that the podcast is boring or that it's an environmental podcast or whatever. So I think it's about trying to find that balance between making it educational and entertaining, but also ultimately my goal is to give my guests a platform to share their opinions, to share their thoughts. And if their thoughts and their opinions happen to be the same as other people who have been on the show before, that's is what it is. And maybe that's because they're in the majority or something, but
yeah, exactly.
I guess over the last year, I've kind of come to a point where I just don't care what people think.
Yep.
If people don't like the topic, then they don't have to listen. It's a free podcast. Short of the 160 people that support me on Patreon, I don't super care about people's unsolicited opinions, unless it's helpful, like you said, like, hey, really like this episode, but what if you tried this instead? Or like, that's helpful. But if someone's just like, stop talking about climate change, that doesn't help me. So It's hard though. I mean, I'm sure you guys have come across that already with your show.
Yeah, a little bit, I think, haven't we?
Not a huge amount, to be honest, but like we've all
You will.
ourselves. Like started off with 6 shows and now we're on 62. It's sort of taken us a bit by surprise. We never committed to a longer term project, and we've just naturally found the energy, and we still have it actually, and it's pretty exciting for us in particular to be connecting internationally a lot more, and it's something we want to do more of, because you know, it's almost like, I don't know how you see your show, and that was probably my last question, is, you know, what do you get out of it, and what gets you out of bed to keep going with it this far down the track? Like I sort of feel like, because we've got a few runs on the board, we can almost reach out to who we're inspired by and who we want to find out about, and ask any damn question we want. And we wouldn't have a platform or opportunity to do that otherwise in our everyday lives. And I'm just sort of like, wow, what a cool opportunity to sort of pick the brains of people that blow me away, and you know, get inside their minds and their heart and their souls, and explore genres I don't know so much about, and areas of the world that I haven't connected with yet myself. That's sort of what keeps me going. I don't know, what keeps you going, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, certainly all of what you just said resonates a lot with me in terms of, I mean, what an amazing opportunity it is to sit down with people that you respect and that you love, and get to ask them any question you want. And really, for me, what I've gotten a lot out of it is personal growth, and gained a lot of different perspectives from a lot of different people. I've also made a lot of connections with a lot of people, which I wouldn't have made if it wasn't for my podcast. And I can't undervalue that. I know that that's a huge benefit to me and my photography and my journey as a person, as a human being. You know, the connections that we make with other people and the relationships that we foster with others. I think that's why we're here on Earth, right? So at least one of the reasons. So that's definitely a big one for me. And then, you know, just a lot of interesting perspectives that you get to pick up on from people that you maybe would have never thought of before. Or I just think it's like a free education, you know.
It's
like,
so true. Yeah, it's amazing. What
another question that's probably interesting for us to talk about on this show, because we chose a very visual platform to do it, and the podcast is basically a non-visual platform, and you're talking about photographs. How do you sort of get around that? Do you find that, I mean, you probably don't even think about it now, you've been doing it so long, but I sometimes think of it the other way around. Like, how do you run a photography show when you can't see any photographs? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I think that's where my background in psychology plays into things, because ever since I was younger, I've always had a deep interest in people and humans and their experience. And so I think what listeners will find through my podcast is that a lot of what I'm exploring is the human side of the landscape photography. So, you know, trying to dig deeper into what makes the people behind the photographs tick. And so to some degree, the image or the images are of less import in terms of what we're exploring. I mean, obviously it's an easy conversational entree in terms of saying, oh, you have this really cool photo, tell us how you made it. But I think for me, what makes my podcast so much more fun is to go deeper and talk about, you know, motivation, and talk about ethics, and talk about current affairs and the craft and things of that nature. That's what more interests me. Like, what would you want to talk about with somebody around a campfire when you don't have the ability to look at photographs around a campfire either? So that kind of thing. So yeah.
So, Matt, what's the best way for people to connect with your podcast and your work in general?
So yeah, I guess probably the best way if you're looking for the podcast is just to look on your whatever you use for podcasts. Just search for f-stop, collaborate, and listen. Or you can search for my name. I'm sure it'll pop up then as well. Or you can just go to my website, which I have a link to my podcast on my website.
Yeah, we'll also link it in the show notes as well for the YouTube show. So we'll have it all there as well.
It's a beautiful website, mate. I'm looking at it right now. It's just, lovely.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Plug
to Jack Brower. He created my website. He creates a lot of great websites for photographers all over the world.
And he supports your show as well, I think, if I remember correctly. So it's fantastic. Yeah.
Well, he doesn't, but we should make him do that. No, Jack's a great guy. He's actually he was one of the co-founders of Nature First as well.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, he's an awesome dude.
I signed up for that as well.
If you've never,
great
he
initiative.
would be a fascinating person to get on your show. He makes my photography look childlike. His Colorado mountain photography is just fantastic. It's mountainphotography.com.
Yeah, right.
Well, that's another question I wouldn't mind putting to you, Matt. Who would you see that might enjoy connecting with our show?
Well, I know you've already talked about David Thompson. He would be great. He's a friend of mine and he's an awesome photographer, but he also has he just has a different mindset when it comes to photography than I think most people have. He's pretty laid back and he doesn't do it for fame or money. He's just loves it. So David Thompson would be great. I'm trying to think who else would be interesting to talk to. Have you had Renee Algesheimer on your show?
I've had him in the works for a while actually. He's just taken a bit of a break at the moment, but he has said he's interested in coming on.
He would be great. I just love the way his mind works. And I would love to hear you talk to Brooks Jensen as well.
I don't know Brooks. I'll talk that
He's he creates Lenswork magazine.
Oh yeah.
And Lenswork podcast. And I tell you what, I interviewed him on my podcast and I had 0 questions ready and I was so nervous and it was literally probably top 10 of my podcast. Just fantastic.
Wow.
Brilliant. Awesome.
He's great.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for being with us. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on, and your work does have such broad impact on the landscape community in general, and you've brought a lot of people to us that we wouldn't otherwise know about, and the perspectives that they all have, and it's fantastic. And your photography and your climbing of mountains is just superb. So thank you very much for coming on. We've had a ball today, we really appreciate it.
Oh,
really enjoyed it, Matt. Like a long time in coming. I'm glad we finally got here.
Absolutely. Thanks for making time in your busy schedule as well. It's
and don't make look too bad, mate.
No, I appreciate it. You guys are great. Thanks so much.
No worries, Matt. Well, all the best, and thanks everyone for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe as well. And we'll see you again next week. And thanks again, Matt. Catch you later, everyone.
Peace out.